and let alone each other. The phone rings again and again, but now this time verbs are being annihilated. The pleasant sound of nouns are erased by a pencil. This is more like death than love. This leaving resembles a refugee in some famine city between a home he doesn't any longer have and a country which refuses to accept him. This leaving is the mother of all pains, but a common pain to all children born of mothers from other lands. This pain is ordinary, he says to himself as he looks inside the window, which is covered with fog and foreign vowels. He looks inside the window again, and he sees a story unraveling itself. It is the season of unraveling, he says, and he adds the story is written with the blood of the seasons. So I think that's all. Thank you so much for inviting me, Jennifer, and for having me.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to see the book finally in
Thank
print.
you.
I remember when you were on Facebook getting so many semi-finalist nods and finalist nods, and it was obvious that it was going to be taken very, very soon. So
Thank you so much.
congratulations.
You were with me all the way. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So great. So now we have Diannely. Let me just call up her bio so we can welcome her, and let me unmute her so we can make sure that, there we go, ask to unmute. Good, perfect. Okay. I'm very glad that we resent the link because people were coming in the beginning of the intro. So I think that everybody who is supposed to be here is here now. At least I hope so. And if anybody in the audience knows that there's someone who's not here, please do go ahead and forward them the link so that they can join us. Diannely Antigua is a Dominican-American poet and educator born and raised in Massachusetts. Her debut collection, Ugly Music, from Yes Yes Books, was published in 2019. It was the winner of the Pamet River Prize and a 2020 Whiting Award. She received her BA in English from the University of Massachusetts, where she won the Jack Kerouac Creative Writing Scholarship, and she received her MFA at NYU, where she was awarded a Global Research Initiative Fellowship to study in Florence, Italy. She is the recipient of additional fellowships from Cantamundo, Community of Writers, and the Fine Arts Work Center Summer Program in Provincetown. Her work has been nominated for both the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net. Her poems can be found in many journals, including Washington Square Review, Bennington Review, the Adroit Journal. Her heart is in Brooklyn. Please help me welcome Diannely Antigua.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really am happy that we were able to reschedule this, even though we are in the midst of a pandemic, but I'm really glad to be with all of you this evening. My heart is in Brooklyn, but my body is in New Hampshire, and has been for quite some time, but Brooklyn does have at least a piece of my heart for sure. I'm going to be reading some poems from Ugly Music, and then I'll read one new poem. Okay. Re-education. I listen to podcasts to learn about feminism, watch porn to make sure I'm doing it right. I dance on the bar because coyote ugly, because these shoes and this drink. I'm almost 30, and I still think Bloody Mary is a game with a mirror. Sometimes she appears at 2 a.m. Sometimes she's in the toilet's piss reflection before the flush. There was a truth in this magic. The time I took Plan B, then the other time I took Plan B, I bled for 2 months. There could have been a mother in me. And I told no one except the man at Tacos Lupita who asked what I wanted in my burrito. And I think I said baby. I think I spun around 3 times and whispered a name. And there was no floor when I fell. When the queen flew from my womb, there was glass and napkins and the doctor saying, wake up, wake up. For my next poem, actually this one's not in the book either. I guess before I read this poem, I should preface it with the fact that I suffer from chronic body pain and have suffered from chronic body pain since I was 16. So I've never lived in an adult body without pain, and I've never really been able to do things that I guess able-bodied young adults can do. So I wrote this poem about kind of like the genesis of that chronic body pain. Chronically, it started when I was 16. After, instead of falling in love with Jesus, I fell in love with a boy. A little bit of God's wrath now living in my right shoulder, right hip, right side of my newly kissed neck. I knew he was jealous. God, not the boy. Maybe because instead of reading a chapter in Proverbs before bed, I spoke to the boy on the phone, whispering, my body cramped in the dark corner of the living room, my family already asleep. I told the boy I loved him, like a breathy hallelujah, like the hush of the MRI machine taking me into its mouth, or the x-rays, or my silent bending over in the blue paper gown in front of the doctor as he checked my spine. And the boy touched my spine too, as he reached under my shirt, unhooked my padded bra. This was before the diagnosis. The word itself sounding like a disease diagnosis, how it shares the first 3 letters of my name, diagnosis. If I could take my tiny shovel hand, carve out the synapses from my head, shoulders, knees, and toes, oh bless, bless. It is meaningless how invisible the body in pain when God is a house I can't leave. All right. This next poem is also about another type of genesis, about the genesis of my name or would-be name. As you'll find out in the poem, I was almost named Sandra after Sandra Dee in the movie Grease. So, in the country where my parents met in a taxi cab. I was almost named after the woman who put out a cigarette with her red high heel. It's the carnival scene. John Travolta on his knees, worshiping her black spandex pants and red belted waist. It was the first movie my mother watched in America. She didn't speak English. I didn't eat the beans from the school cafeteria. They were never served with rice, just a hot dog. But I learned that an A in spelling equaled coupons for free cheesy breadsticks at Domino's. And I learned that hair wasn't supposed to smell like fried pork chops when the white kids formed a line to whip my braids. When my cousin and I played American, she'd grunt and move her tongue, make weird sounds. I'd pretend not to know English. Then we'd buy too many things with Monopoly money and stuff them into plastic bags. Anytime Grease came on TV, my mother would hum the songs. You're the one that I want. Ooh, 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 honey. My lips to the screen. I'd breathe a name into the fog, the smoke crushed under a foot. Okay. This next poem is called Picked, and this, the location is my beloved Brooklyn. Picked. As I watch a man steal fruit on the corner of Myrtle Ave and Broadway, I want to know what to do with the memory. Days of the week underwear, the hand cupping the small combs over my gray t-shirt, feeling for the raised tip, pink eraser bud, not yet brown. I try to remember what was on TV. My sister's back to us, her flipping the channels, the screen turning black for a second, and between Fox News, This Old House, and Wishbone. Maybe he touched me to reruns of the Brady Bunch. How I never trusted the father in the room with them, the girls, especially Cindy with the blonde pigtails, her blue stare like knowing her weight, light enough to hold down with just a forearm. It didn't matter that it was a Tuesday in August. He played with the planets on the edge of my cotton briefs, the rings of Saturn for Saturday. Mars was for Tuesdays. Mars was for Wednesday mornings and sometimes Wednesday afternoons before someone told me to shower. Mars was for spilled Hawaiian punch on Jupiter or laundry days on Mercury. Mars was for me and the mirror. When I'd push aside the fabric and see the sprouts of fuzz, black stubble of strawberry in the thief's hand, rubbing the skin with a dry finger, how hungry to steal just one. All right, I have 3 more poems for you. I should have said this before reading any of my poems, but trigger warning for mental illness and sexual abuse. So please do take care of yourself if any of these poems trigger you in any way and you need to take a break. Variations on a theme. When my mother says I was born on a Wednesday like my new niece, I tell her the babies keep me on earth a little longer. I have to see their faces before I die. Then I tell her I must love or die. My body can't be alone for more than a month. I need a bedfellow for the healing, bedfellow for each season above the ground. She laughs a little between tears, and I stay silent. It's not the end I want to say. As I reach for her hand, I want to say, Mom, I'm in the bad order, the order of fire, then relief. I want to say we don't get to pick what wrecks us. This little straw joins the other last straws. When the dozen eggs became none, or the crumbs fell like David's star to 6 different points in the room, and in the center, my mind thrashed in a crib made of bone. I want to say that a mother who was not my mother gave me a gift, a bracelet, a blue checkered gown, the rehearsed opera of my rights. I want to say there are so many Wednesdays left to cry on. If I would have known then how many Wednesdays it would take to die, if I would have known all the Wednesdays I'd be given back. There is a song playing on the radio when I finally apologize to myself. I can't make out the words, but it feels like forgiveness. Listen, I'm a stupid whore and I'm sorry. I tried to hang myself and I'm sorry. If a piano could cure a life, let it be this one. I remember the two fish I colored in at the hospital looked like they were kissing my hand. I felt soft, like my own lips smushed up against a mirror. And it was wet, as if the ocean had lived inside me and I just discovered the first wave. This next poem is out after Alberto Rios. Everything's been said, but one last thing about the ocean. It doesn't love back. I watched two women on paddleboards balance the waves and their bodies pushing through water to propel themselves forward. And it reminds me of high school science, when I learned about Newton's laws of motion, especially the third one. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But I don't watch alone. In this coastal town, I eat lunch with two new friends, both artists, and we contemplate the existence of water sports. One woman on the paddleboard falls into the ocean and pulls the other in with her. They laugh, and so do we. But then we talk about trust, how unforgiving the ocean is. The water, then what's beneath, how all week we've seen the shark flag waving on the shoreline, or how we've been warned to never swim with the seals. And I confess, I can't swim. These are the lessons my mother never taught me. Together, we've never been submerged in water, or maybe we have. At the church baptism party, when we waded in the pool and the minister laid his hands on us, dipped us in the name of Jesus. I stopped wearing my gold flower earrings after that. The center emerald already missing from one of them. Then I threw away all my denim jeans and my Backstreet Boys cassettes. Everything has been said. But one last thing about faith. It's seeing the shark flag and still jumping in, or believing that a shell washed up on shore can hold all matter of good intention when placed on a bookshelf, looked at from time to time. It's believing you'll be dragged under by what's closest to you, won't even see it coming. And I have one last poem, a little short one. And this one recently appeared in Poem a Day, so you may have seen it in your inbox.
And I just
Anniversary.
I just posted the link for it so everyone can also read along with you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Anniversary. Outside, an abandoned mattress sags with rain, and the driveway turns all sludge. When I remember I could have died 8 years ago in a bed smaller than the one I share with a new lover who just this morning found another gray hair in my afro, and before resettling the wiry curl with the others, kissed the freckle on my forehead. I admit, I don't know a love that doesn't destroy. Last night while we slept, a mouse drowned in the rice pot I left soaking in the sink. I tried to make a metaphor out of this. The way he took the mouse to the edge of the lake in the yard, released it to a deeper grave. It was an anniversary. Just my lover taking a dead thing away, taking it somewhere I couldn't see. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you ended with that new poem that everyone's been reading and sharing since it was just published. I have been reading the chat, and we have some requests for Zeeshan to just read the title poem from his book. So we're just going to go back to him for a moment, and then I'm going to introduce Joshua.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Thank you. So I won't read fast this time like I did last.
Okay.
So I'll try. Thank you. Ophthalmology. He asked the doctor who had been cutting into his skull with the scalpel if something else might break inside the brain case. Would it be fair for the man to press the switch of departure this early in the journey to stop the flutter of red phoenixes and the glances of blonde daisies, if it would be okay to sleep where the children sleep, where the narrator lives outside of the frame? The doctor did not answer him, but held a scope to the man's eyes and kept cutting through tissue until the blade had reached the pearl in his brain. Thank you so much, and I love the last reading. Thank you.
Great. So now let me go over to Joshua and ask him to unmute. Perfect. And I'll introduce him now. Dr. Joshua Bennett is the Mellon Assistant Professor of English and Creative Writing at Dartmouth College. He is the author of 3 books of poetry and literary criticism: The Sobbing School, Penguin 2016, which was a National Poetry Series selection, and a finalist for the NAACP Image Award; Ode, which is his new book, just out this year from Penguin; and Being Property Once Myself, Harvard University Press, also out in 2020. It was the winner of the Thomas J. Wilson Memorial Prize. He holds a PhD in English from Princeton and an MA in Theater and Performance Studies from the University of Warwick, where he was a Marshall Scholar. In 2010, he delivered the commencement address at the University of Pennsylvania, from which he graduated with the distinctions of Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude. Dr. Bennett has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Ford Foundation, and the Society of Fellows at Harvard University. His writing has appeared in The Nation, the New York Times, the Paris Review, Poetry, and many other places. He has recited his original works at venues such as the Sundance Film Festival, the Clinton Global Citizen Awards, the NAACP Image Awards, and President Obama's Evening of Poetry and Music at the White House, which you can see if you want to on YouTube. His first work of narrative nonfiction, Spoken Word, A Cultural History, is forthcoming from Knopf. We are especially excited to welcome Joshua back to the center because one of our favorite readings in the past 8 years has been when Joshua came with Noah Warren when he first won the National Poetry Series. And just it blew us away, and your family was in the audience that night, and we got to meet them, and you told us a little bit about your history, your local history, and your connection to the area. So, of course, Joshua came back for the Sleepy Hollow Lit Fest, where he read with Gregory Pardlow, but we are just such big fans of you and your work, Joshua, and we're all really happy to have you back. So welcome, and thank you for being here, perhaps on the night of your child's birth. We don't know.
My wife's in the background. She'll let us know. If I throw the laptop across the room, it's because he's here.
If you have to leave, we will understand.
No worries. Yeah, no, I appreciate that a ton. First, thank you, Diannely, Zeeshan, for those beautiful readings and for sharing the space with me. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Jennifer, for welcoming me back. I don't know who sent you that bio. I feel like my big sister must have sent that over. That's the longest version of my bio I've ever heard. So apologies to y'all for taking up space with that. I'm going to read a bit from my new book, Ode, which actually is a picture of me and my dad taken back in 1992 in the front. My mom took it, so Penguin cut her a check, which makes me happy. But a lot of the poems I'll be reading tonight are dad poems. So I'm actually gonna start where I closed off my last reading at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. So this is gonna be America Will Be after Langston Hughes. And all you need to know about it, I guess, is that my father integrated his high school in Jim Crow, Alabama at 17 years old. That was a year before he would enlist in the Vietnam War for no other reason than the recruiter told him that they would not take two sons from the same family. And so he enlisted to save his little brother's life. And whenever I sit down to write poems, I think about the moral courage it takes for a teenage boy to do anything like that. He is my hero, and it's an honor to have the opportunity to share this book with him. So this is America Will Be after Langston Hughes. I am now at the age where my father calls me brother when we say goodbye. Take care of yourself, brother. He whispers a half beat before we hang up the phone, and it's as if some great bridge has unfolded over the air between us. He is 70 years old. He was born in the throat of Jim Crow, Alabama, one of 10 children, their bodies side by side in the kitchen each morning, like a pair of hands exalting. Over breakfast, I ask him to tell me the hardest thing about going to school back then, expecting some history I have already memorized. Boycotts and attack dogs, fire hoses, Bull Connor in his personal tank, candy paint shining white as a slaver's ghost. He says, honestly, probably having to read the Canterbury Tales. He says, eating lunch alone. Now I hear the word America and think first of my father's loneliness, of the hands holding the pens that stabbed him as he walked through the hallway, unclenched palms settling onto a wooden desk, taking notes, trying to pretend the shame didn't feel like an inheritance. You say democracy. And I see the men holding documents that sent him off to war a year later, Motown blaring from a country boy's bunker as napalm scarred the sky into jigsaw patterns, his eyes open wide as the blooming blue heart of the light bulb in a Crown Heights basement, where he and my mother will dance for the first time, their bodies swaying like rockets in the impossible dark. And yes, I know that this is more than likely not what you mean when you sing liberty, but it is the only kind I know or can readily claim, the times where those hunted by history are underground and somehow still daring to love what they cannot hold or fully fathom, when a stranger is not a threat, but the promise of a different ending. I woke up this morning and there were men on television plotting a wall big enough to box out an entire world. Families torn with the stroke of a pen, citizenship, little more than some garment that can be stolen or reduced to cinder at a tyrant's whim. My father knows this, grew up knowing this, witnessed firsthand the fire bombs, the Klan, multiple messiahs, love soaked and shot through, somehow still believes in this grand blood-stained experiment, still votes, still prays that his children might make a life unlike any he has ever seen. He looks at me like the promise of another cosmos. And I never know what to tell him. All of the books in my head have made me cynical and distant, but there's a choir in him that calls me forward. My disbelief, built as it is from the bricks of his belief, not in any America you might see on network news or hear heralded before a football game, but in the quiet power of Sam Cooke singing that he was born by a river that remains unnamed, that he runs alongside to this day, some vast and future country, some nation within a nation, black as candor, loud as the sound of my father's unfettered laughter over cheese eggs and coffee, his eyes shut tight as armories, his fists finally unclenched as if he were invincible. All right, so this next poem is in some ways a riff on Robert Hayden, and in other ways just a poem about what it feels like to grow up with no money in the wintertime in New York, which means not that you turn the heat up, because you can't turn the heat up, but rather that you boil a bunch of water and you leave the oven open and you put on a bunch of layers of clothes. So this is our ode, O-W-E-D, to Long Johns. I remember thinking, these are like skin for my skin, and a truer thing to call black to boot, as my first pair were blacker even than my nascent curls, which turned brown whenever they would wrestle the light. My father called you thermals, which always brought to mind radioactive weapons of one kind or another, two nuclear physicists using casual shorthand over coffee. For 10 years, under thrift store denim and corduroys rubbed raw by Miss Blint's blue carpet, I rocked your soft scales with minimal fuss, only twice or so grumbling to Pop about how you make me appear, if not heavier per se, than just, well, stuck in all of my clothes, that this is on the whole untenable for a boy my age. No small tragedy, given these were formative years, you see, critical even, as it pertained to the glowing, affirmative sense of myself I would need for success in the general public situation. Pop's concern remained with the cold, and I remained a boy cocooned, fed up, hungry for better methods of breaking winter's callous rule. Anything other than having to leave the oven door open, setting my mother's best 4 black pots to boil at once, our entire family gathered as if shrapnel in the living room, so close our bodies grew almost indeterminate there, huddled like stars under blankets to thaw. 1 or 2 more from this book, and then I'll pivot to a book I wrote over the summer during the pandemic. I was on leave from teaching, and I just couldn't think of anything else to do because I couldn't really go outside. So I wrote a new book of poems called The Study of Human Life, and I'll share a little bit from that after these next couple of poems. So I don't know how many of you are basketball fans, but LeBron James will be competing tonight for his 4th championship ring. And I love LeBron James. So I wrote a poem about LeBron James with thanks to Ed Roberson called When Thy King Was the Boy. And this poem is also in part about what it means to, I'll just be frank, like to be Black in an elite private school, but you're on the bench for the basketball team, which comes with all sorts of psychological complications when you're 15 years old. But also LeBron James was the biggest star in the world. And I just remember watching him on YouTube when YouTube first came out and thinking about the kind of mythical weight that must have carried for him as a teenager like us. So this is When Thy King Was a Boy. The most recent headline on the Deadspin front page reads, LeBron James is omnipotent. And the first thing I think is that even back in 2006, his advent means a certain kind of undeniable post-soul apocalypse. The man was low-key Copernicus in this sense, at least for all those boys at the baseline of my memory's best eye, coming of age in MJ's wake, wandering wild with no martyr to call archetype, no popular afterlife through which to measure the value of a solitary human breath. We were 16 on the bench, starving for exits our bodies might build from hours spent in tepid gyms and the backs of buses scanning Faulkner, hedging our bets with the books in case Cornell never called on the ball front and we were forced to let go of dreams already long destroyed by genes and childhood vice. All that untapped fleshly potential, sacrificed in the name of first-person shooters, chess lessons, friends who fled when beat down swelled beyond their means. But Bron would never do us like that. This we knew from his high-definition entry into the land of the generally despised and perpetually syndicated, only a year or so older than us, but boundless in his vision and grace, vicious with the first step, every outlet pass launching across the length of the court as if cannoned or indwelt by a god of pitch, summer waging its two-front war on our hair and skin, and no one cares to breathe. The boy king rises like an aria. We sing. He who will one day carry entire economies in his stead, but for now is little more than a hunter green headband, honey-colored 23 emblazoned across his chest like the chosen few of us back then, with the game or gall to claim that we too had inherited the air. How many people here are from New York, if I may ask? Just a show of hands or, clap emojis. Okay, so a bit of New York vernacular. There's this thing called the Open. And the open is when your parents aren't home. And, you know, my parents are evangelical Christians. They were always home. And so I never had the open until I was 17 years old. One day they left for a vacation. And when I had the open, this is basically what happened. It's also about Rilke and about having high school friends that are very cruel. So this is the open. To be sure, there is a certain promiscuous relation between what Rilke calls, in his 8th and greatest elegy, the open, and what I meant in 12th grade when I dialed Tiana's digits into my aquamarine Sprint flip phone, said, "You free this Wednesday? I got the open," which was shorthand, of course, for open crib or open house, without the academic associations that attend the latter phrase. In Rilke's mouth, the term connotes a way of seeing the world as a blurring of body and shape, no discernible split between the water and its trout like broadswords soft to the touch, lending their silver speed to the landscape. What I am trying to say, I have spent years yearning to be so close to the body of another, my mind might pass like mist for me, an albatross I could shed without penance or pain. Tiana leaves for the 64 bus eventually, and I am only a boy alone in his childhood bed, watching the hours improve. At school the next day, my friends adorn me in their singular brutality, claim Tiana has me open, outlined in marigolds, my body luminous, my body barely discernible, as if I had gazed upon the edge of the known world with all my eyes, and yet lived. All right. So a couple of short dad poems, and I'll let y'all off the hook. Thank you, everyone, for listening and spending time with us tonight. So my wife and I were working with both a midwife and a doula, and our doula's name is Perpetual, which is a gorgeous name all on its own, and of course had to become poetry. And thank you, Barb, for saying don't let us off the hook. That's very sweet. Okay, this is dad poem number 6. Your doula's name is Perpetual, which is an especially elegant word that means some things are so good they go on long past the might of our mortal eyes. Our affection for you is perpetual. Our attention for you is perpetual. The modern world is not perpetual, and neither is the earth, son, though my sense is the latter will last much longer. Another word for perpetual is everlasting. And that's one your grandparents love, as it was ubiquitous in hymns we sang when I was barely big enough to lift the red leather books which held our psalms on my own. When I could not manage believing anymore, I read a man named Meister Eckhart. He once wrote, "Every animal is a book about God," or something like that. The scale of such love was a revelation. Ubiquitous is an unwieldy word. It means everywhere. Son, you are a palace of books about God. My love for you is ubiquitous. It shines in the eyes of the trees outside our kitchen window, beetles giving color to the front yard, every single brick in the room of your life we are building, even now, as we dream. Dad poem number 4. A boy, I am told. The familiar numbers fall like a wall of ash across my mind. The future now made both freshly opaque and terrifying in its clarity. I know what I have survived. I have lived to tell of it only in songs I can belt without ending the world. But enough of the untold terrors we know. There is an entire genre of poems about the fear of bringing another Black sun onto the earth. I refuse them all. Little one, they are not ours to bear. There is a war outside, yes, and inside our home there are books about flowers, 10-speed bicycles, dinosaurs with names you can't even pronounce yet. We are building a story for you that is bigger than bombs or the words of assassins who do not love us. Your inheritance is this refusal and infinitely more. Triceratopses, hyacinth, racing uphill in our blue helmets, two runaway ice comets cracking the night air open, so swift within its shadow, we are almost invisible. All right, so this is the last one of my last poem. It's dad poem number 3, ultrasound number 2, with a line from Gwendolyn Brooks. And just quick preface, I wasn't allowed into any of my son's ultrasounds over the course of the pregnancy because of pandemic protocol. And by the second one, my wife and all her genius, we just crafted this fugitive plot where she snuck in her phone so she could FaceTime me. And of course, the radiologist, who's also an ethical being, in so many ways, she played along and she helped us out. So I just remember that first feeling of seeing his heartbeat on the screen and thinking about, I guess, moments like this one, though this was clearly long in the future, where even in the midst of this great distance between us, we still find ways, not just to mediate it, but I think to be together elsewhere, So I'm excited to see him when he gets here. And he has good taste in music. He really loves Dipset, which is my favorite hip hop group. And when we put Dipset on, he starts kicking in double time. So I'm glad to know the boy has an ear. Dad poem number 3, with a line from Gwendolyn Brooks. Months into the plague now, I am disallowed entry even into the waiting room with mom, escorted outside instead by men armed only with guns and bottles of hand sanitizer, their entire countenance its own American metaphor. The first time I see you then, in full force, I am pacing maniacally up and down the block outside, FaceTiming the radiologist and your mother too, her arm angled like a cellist to help me see. We are dazzled by the sight of each bone in your feet, the pulsing black archipelago of your heart, your fists in front of your face like mine when I was only just born, 10 times as big as you are now. Your great-grandmother calls me Tyson the moment she sees this pose, prefigures a boy built for conflict, her barbarous and metal little man. She leaves the world only months after we learn you are entering into it, and her mind the year before that. In the dementia's final days, she envisions herself as a girl of 17, running through fields of strawberries, unfettered as a kingfisher. I watch her stance and imagine her laughter echoing back across the ages. You, her youngest descendant born into freedom, our littlest burden lifter, world beater, avant-garde percussionist, swinging darkness into song. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. That was gorgeous. I'm so glad you read that last poem, the poem a day. I'm posting it for everyone to see now, so you can read it after the reading again to yourselves. Thank you so much. I hope you all have time for a brief Q&A because your audience might have a couple of questions for you guys about your books. So I'm going to unmute people now. Okay, there you go. You can unmute yourselves if you have a question, or you can raise your hand. And don't forget to read the chat before you go of all of the comments of your adoring fans. Questions, anybody?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Peter. This was wonderful. I greatly enjoyed it. It's not quite like actually being in the train station where where Hudson Valley takes place, but it was wonderful. All three of you. Joshua, you bring me back to a reading by Robert Hayden, who you mentioned. We are going circa 1976, within plus or minus a year. Pardon me. It was a reading at Cornell in a little coffee house on campus called the Temple of Zeus. and he was introduced. I can't remember the gentleman who introduced him. I guess it was a graduate student, but he was appropriately very laudatory, and he said this phrase always stuck in my mind, how Robert Hayden collected awards like the rest of us collected rejection slips, and then Robert Hayden came to the rostrum, and he said just very simply and humbly, I have collected my share of rejection slips also. And then something else that he said, I can't remember what the poem was, but he said how he had mentioned how the critics had been hard on him about it. And he said, but the critics are wrong and I am right. And he said how there were all kinds of little tricks in it that they hadn't gotten, I guess. But over the years, I've just drawn strength from that evening. So I just wanted to share, and again, I thought you were all wonderful. Thank you.
I think Alan Brown has a question.
Hi, Joshua. We met at Hudson Valley a while ago, and I got your book then. I love the book. So I just wanted to ask you a question. I played Division I basketball. Did you ever get off the bench?
Okay, now I'm unmuted. I did not. Absolutely not. I switched sports though, so I started doing poetry slam my senior year, and then that changed my life. I got to be in a HBO documentary and grew some facial hair, so life got a lot better.
Good plan.
Yeah, that's sweet.
Other questions? Craft questions? I have a question for Joshua about your new book. Is it done? Your new book that you wrote during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's done. So Penguin has it now. I don't think it can come out next year because I think we're on a cycle, which is nice. There's a sort of democratic element to that. So you can't, well, somewhat, anyway, I'm still, a young person on the label, as it were. So I think the book will be held until 2022. But yeah, it's done. It's been a pretty incredible process. I mean, it's a little different than my first two books. There's a whole fiction portion to it too. So it's really like a hybrid genre book, but a fair portion of it is about fatherhood and really just this entire experience in the pandemic and how it's forced, I think, me and my wife to think very differently about the home life we were building. And it's left a lot of time for meditation, especially as someone that was on the road for almost 12 years, I guess, in my life. Like I've been touring since I was about 20 doing the spoken word stuff. And so having to sit still now for almost an entire year, and losing that income just as we're starting our family, but also I think discovering a very different relationship to craft. I mean, part of how I write books is I try the poems out in front of people. That's a big part of my editing process, and just losing that contact, I think, completely changed my relationship to process, which I'll actually be interested in hearing from my fellow readers a bit about how it feels to have your first books out in the midst of all this and how you've adjusted to it. I can't quite fathom what it would be like to have the sort of first effort out in this climate. And I mean, clearly you both are reading beautifully, but I would love to hear more if you're interested in talking at all about it, what it's been like.
Would you like to start?
Sure. Well, my book came out last May. So I did have some non-pandemic time to, I guess, tour with the book. But then my book won the Whiting Award this March, and that was announced. So like we did the award ceremony through Zoom, and it was March 25th. So it was early pandemic days. So and there was all of these plans to meet with agents and the press, and we were going to have a big ceremony in New York City. So it was going to be all of these things that kind of never happened. Granted, I mean, I was never expecting that Ugly Music would win such a prestigious award like the Whiting Award. So all of it was a blessing regardless. I mean, like, I was just grateful for all of it. The Whiting Foundation is hoping to do some of those other things later on when it's safe to do so. But it's been interesting that my book has gotten so much buzz throughout the pandemic, and a lot of just Zoom readings, which again, I would have done a lot of those in person. I just read last night. I'm reading tonight, and I have some other readings lined up for next week and the following week and the following week after that. So it's just kind of like on top of one another, just boom, boom, boom. But this is what I love to do, and I love reading, and I love doing classroom visits, and especially considering the nature of my poetry, I feel like a lot of young people kind of gravitate towards it, and it does deal with some taboo topics that students really want to actually talk about. They do want to talk about mental illness, which it shouldn't be taboo to talk about those topics at all. So even with that, like I have been surprised that it has gotten the recognition, even despite the fact that it is quite a sensitive topic for some. But yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind, this pandemic, as far as my book goes. But again, like I am very grateful for all of it,
I would just agree with that although my book came out this March, right at the front of the pandemic, so I really wasn't sure what we would do. And luckily, thanks to Jennifer and some other poet friends, we had readings planned, and some more I think will happen soon, which allowed me to at least reach out to some people and see how it goes. But I mean, poetry itself is a small thing. I mean, not so many people read it in America. So, I mean, internationally it's big, but in our country, it's like a special audience and academics, but even the universities are kind of shut. So where I thought I would go would be to like Columbia, or like, were the places where usually I was. And so we've had some readings right before the pandemic last year, but the book wasn't ready. So now that the book is available, this was the first official reading. So I'm really grateful to Jennifer and the Hudson Valley Center, and to all of you for including me. Thank you.
I have a question. First of all, this was an incredibly great reading for all three of you. Diannely, a question for you. And you were from Brooklyn, and then we have two poets living in New Hampshire now, which is kind of cool. I think you said you were living in New Hampshire at the moment. Yeah. But I recall that you originally came, or your family came from the Dominican Republic. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Having been there, and I love the Dominican Republic, but was there anything in the culture of the Dominican Republic that has influenced your poetry?
Well, yes, for sure. I feel like I misspoke earlier when I said that my heart's in Brooklyn. I am actually from Massachusetts, and I lived in Brooklyn while I was doing my MFA. And then when I moved back to Massachusetts for a little bit, and then now I live in New Hampshire, but very close to the Massachusetts border. So I've just been kind of hopping around all over the place for the past 5 years. And I was in Italy for a semester, so I've just been everywhere. But I guess to get to your question, I would definitely say that my Dominican culture does come into play into the poetry. I mean, how could it not? I mean, even if I weren't writing, I guess the quintessential Latinx poem, the poem would still be Latinx because a Latinx person wrote it. So it's one of those things where it's, I guess, like I'm always thinking about my culture and who I am and my identity, even if it's not explicitly stated in the poem. I'm always thinking about language, always thinking about, you know, how I was raised bilingual and kind of the sounds of words and like what, you know, the weight of maybe a Spanish word versus an English word might be. Like, I'm always thinking about those types of things, even if they're not, again, evident in the poem. And the one poem that I did read about, you know, in the country where my parents met in a taxi cab. I mean, my parents did meet here in the States, even though both of them are from the DR and I was born here. So then I have to kind of reckon with that too. Like, I've actually never been to the Dominican Republic. So I have to think about the island where I'm from that I've never been to, and how, you know, how that plays into who I am too. There are so many different layers to everything, at least in relation to you know, my identities being Latinx and also being Afro Latinx. Like, that's, I could just keep going. You know, like, I have to think about my Afro-Latinidad and what that means too in relation to being Dominican, and how there's just so much colorism within that culture. And, you know, how I've had to deal with internalized racism, you know, at least even within my poems, and then just personally before I could even ever kind of get to the page. And I mean, I talk about that too. I do classroom visits where I speak about my own journey with internalized racism and how it started with just cutting all of my relaxed hair and how I, you know, grew out my Afro, and just kind of that journey. And, you know, even in that last poem I read, I talk about my Afro, but there's kind of nothing about, you know, the journey where I get to the point where I do have an Afro. It's that there's so much about my culture that is always in each poem. But yeah, thank you for that question. Thanks so much, Don.
Any other questions? Questions from some poetry students in the audience, maybe about putting together a collection, advice that you guys have for emerging poets?
Read books. You know, I think that's the advice I always give my students, you know, those that are creative writing, because I teach creative writing and I also teach literary theory and Black studies at Dartmouth. And so, yeah, the best encouragement, I mean, I'm also a self-taught poet, so I think my vantage on this is maybe kind of unique, is that I taught myself to write for the page just through osmosis, effectively. I just read as much as was possible over the course of many years and tried to, you know, steal and mimic. And I had great teachers. You mentioned Gregory Pardlow earlier. I mean, I think Greg was just such a model for me on that front. And he was the first teacher who told me I could use all my Englishes. So I guess that's another kind of advice I would give, though not necessarily in that linguistic frame, but use all the languages that you were raised with. You know, like I was raised in Black vernacular English, and I was raised in the language of the Black church, and I was raised around Dominican Spanish, and I was raised around, I wasn't raised with literary theory, but I was trained as a graduate student, you know, in a conservative English program where I felt like I couldn't have that in the poems initially, right? I felt like that was going to block me off from people I loved and the people who first inspired me to write poetry. And I think having teachers like Greg and like Bivy Francis, who's now my colleague, which is quite surreal, but they were the people that told me, well, it's all in your head, man. Like that music in you has to come out. And it's all the same voice. That's still the voice you had when you were 19 on stage doing poetry slams. And, you know, that's the great lesson of spoken word, is that a lot of the times the people just like you. You know, it's not even always about the book as this kind of sacred object. And you can believe in that too. You know, it's about cultivating yourself as a person and getting that voice out into the world. So that's the advice I would give, is just read, trust all the voices that are in you, and have fun with it. Write from a space of joy too. Don't always just go, I think, to the most difficult truth first. Allow it to be a space of play when you go right to the page.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Do you guys want to add your take to that before we let Joshua watch basketball?
I can hold off. It just started.
No, honestly, like I feel like I'm still emerging, so I trust Dr. Joshua Bennett's advice, and I would also echo that. Definitely read as much as you can, and do write from a place of play and joy, even if you are writing about something that can be particularly heavy. One thing that I've found with my poetry, specifically in this book, is I have these diary entry poems. I didn't read one this evening, but all of the diary entry poems in my book are collage poems written using language that I collected from old journals. And basically what I was doing was just like rewriting previous stories, and almost kind of like appropriating my own language, as it were, and using it as like building blocks to build poems. And it was a way for me to kind of distance myself from some of the heavier material and allow myself to get back to the basics of just playing with language and building a poem versus like trying to write one. So I would definitely encourage play all the time.
I would add that read widely, read against your style, read other literatures, not just our American canon, which is obviously very strong, but there's so many poetries out there. If you can read a different language, or if you have access to a translation, which is something that I love to do. I also think follow the music, because poetry and song have a very old connection. And I think read the first books of poets you admire, because we need to see like how they entered the poem, how they entered language. And sometimes the ecstasy that they have in the first book, in the first poems, it's not again. You don't see that again. So I agree with everything my colleagues have said.
I just listened to Louise Glick's, one of her earliest interviews yesterday morning, when she may have said something she later regretted. I don't know. It was very early, but she, whoever it was, he sounded British maybe, asked her, well, for people who don't know you, what book should they start with? And she said something like, anything but my first book. And it was interesting. Not that I'm arguing with you at all, but it was an interesting comment yesterday morning.
I heard that, and I was interested by why she said that. I mean, because all of her poems are good.
That's right.
But maybe she doesn't feel that way, or she's outgrown that voice that we loved her.
She didn't explain. She didn't say why.
You had to get a cup of coffee, right? Didn't she say?
Right. Coffee. And when you wake up, it's like somebody's telling you have the prize and Nobel Prize or something. It's a lot. So maybe
I'm so happy that she won. That was such a party, and I think maybe that's a good sign of other good news to come next month, I hope.
Yes, pray.
We'll pray.
We noticed that the World Food Program won the Nobel Peace Prize.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you all so much, and not just for your great poems, but really great conversation afterwards and really good advice. And for my students who aren't here tonight, Barb and I and Wayne will share what we learned from all of you in class. Thank you all. This reading will be available, so please tell your people that in about a week or so we'll have it up on our website for you to all see again. Thank you all for being here. Joshua, congratulations to you and your beautiful wife and your gorgeous dog, and good luck with everything. We love you.
Thank you. I love y'all too. Thanks for making space.
Thank you, Jennifer, for everything.
Thank you.
It was
Thank
so great. And Zeeshan, thank you for staying up so late for us.
Yes.
So what time is it out there?
It's 3:30 in the morning.
Sheesh.
I'm gonna crash.
Oh, all right. Thank you. And then
Thank you
guys,
so much.
take care. Be safe out there.
And
Keep
get
reading
the book. Don't forget.
Get all our books.
Support your local bookstores
Mm.
and order from the presses directly. Thank you all for being here. Hopefully see some of you at the gala on October 30th. We have Toy Jericott and Jericho Brown. So please do come. We can't wait to see you back here again.